Hi, everybody. It's Susan, and today we're going to talk about Venus stationing retrograde in just a few days from now. And this retrograde will last about 6 weeks-ish. It's about 40 days, usually, a Venus retrograde. And she is retrograding in Aries at 10 degrees, 50 minutes of tropical Aries, along with the moon. And we're going to talk about this in a moment because it really augments this notion of desire. So the date, the actual universal time date is the 2nd of March, 2025 at midnight, 36 minutes past midnight and 9 seconds for you Virgo stelliums. And this is something that you'll have to add or subtract to. So if you're in North or South America, you go back in time. So it'll be the 1st of March for you. And the rest of the world, most of the world will experience this on the 2nd of March. And many of us will be sleeping, or the lucky ones will be sleeping with their loved one, but you might then change your mind. You never know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look through what is known as the event chart of this turning around of Venus, or the apparent retrograde motion of Venus. Of course, it's only with reference to us here on the Earth. She's doing her thing, and it seems that she's slowing down, stopping, and moving in a different direction from our perspective on Earth. And then, of course, that's literally how we govern our lives. So we can only live through this worldly experience on the material level. And that perception of change is enough to affect us in terms of our lives, and especially unconsciously. Now, I have a few things I'd like you to consider about this event chart. And then I'm going to have I have a list of things that I'd like you to reflect on in terms of the Venus retrograde. So the quality of Venus in general is about relationships. Of course, it's all of the things that we do to connect with others. And it's also our desired nature in terms of our preferences. The moon, interestingly, which is right there with Venus, less than 2 degrees away, is also our desire. It's our heart's desire, not the emotional, romantic desire of a Venus type of desire, which is a desire for a thing or a desire for harmony, etc. The moon is the desire that motivates us from inside. And interestingly, they're together at the point of this retrograde. And that sort of, for me, indicates that we need to doubly pay attention to the notion of what it is that we desire. Venus is also about money. Values, very important to recognize the notion of values with reference to Venus. What do I find of value? Whether that be financially, materially, or in terms of the dynamic in relationships. And then, of course, we have Chiron there. I'm not going to talk too much about Chiron, but Chiron is moving into the third decade of Aries now, and it's going to get a little bit closer each time to its square as Mars is now progressing forward. And Mars is still in Cancer, and it's actually ruling Chiron, Venus, and the moon while they're here in Aries. That's Mars's sign. So Mars plays a big role still. And by the way, Mars still will be in Cancer when Neptune goes into Aries. So that ingress chart is going to have Mars in Cancer for good or evil. So we are going to see that also when we look at that chart that's coming up. But I'll take care of that in a separate video, because otherwise it starts to get a little bit hairy. So the quality of Venus in a Mars sign, and particularly the daytime Mars sign of Aries, is very enthusiastic, very out there, off the cuff, excited about things, motivated to do things and engage with people, can often be a little impatient or impulsive. Let's face it, and also carrying the relational quality outwards in that masculine way that Aries brings. So Aries and Libra, that dynamic is in the masculine signs. Aries and Libra both are masculine signs. And even when Venus is in Libra, her home place in the daytime, that's or rather in the nighttime, that's her home base in the nighttime, the Libra sign. Venus, when she's there in Aries, is picking up even more of the energy of the masculine Mars, but still there's a dynamic even in her home place of Libra, where there's an outward reaching relational energy. Whereas, for example, in Taurus, where Venus is also in her rulership, she's reflecting what she is attracting or she's taking in, receiving. It's a feminine quality. That's the axis of Taurus. And And Scorpio is a feminine or the female axis. And that also helps us to understand this role of Venus. Now she's really reaching out into something. Now there's a desire that's really expressed, or it's out there. But when Venus goes retrograde, and when any planet goes retrograde, it's changing its behavior. It's not the same. It's behaving differently. That's all we can say. There's not a good or a bad. It's behaving differently. And if we just look up in the sky and we say, oh, well, Venus was tracing this pattern and now she's tracing this pattern, it's behaving differently, even as the planet itself. And so if we interpret that and give her the meaning of that relational quality or the values and what we value, what is important, that is changing. And this is something that we want to understand as an internal reflection. Retrogrades also respond to what's going on internally, and perhaps a sense of something needs to be reflected upon. Now, there's always this other aspect, which is that things that have come before, relationships that we thought we were engaging in before, are coming back for a questioning. It may be the actual individual went away and is now coming back, or that we somehow, for whatever reason, had to take a break and we are now reflecting on whether to come back. Either way, the dynamic is being reflected upon with a more, let's say, a deeper consideration. And this is really welcome, especially with this ingress chart, because here, not only do we have Venus with the moon, which, by the way, is super charming, really lovely to have Venus moon together in the chart, but the moon also is extremely impulsive, and it's also a feminine energy, just like Venus, in a masculine sign. So all the desire, all of that nature of what do I want is asserting itself. And this requires a little delicate handling, because it can sometimes be what actually causes a little friction in relationships, to bring that masculine energy of wanting and reaching out into something, into a dynamic of two or more people, where we can actually not realize it, but we might become more self-oriented or even selfish in the process. So this is a great opportunity for recalibrating, and also recognizing, is this particular way of relating helping me or hindering me in relationship? Or is this particular way of relating to my desires helping me or hindering me in relationship? I'll get to that when I come to the questions. But also, is the actual person or the experience of the relationship the one that I want? Am I going after the thing that I really want? This is a great opportunity. In the sign of Aries, we get this every 8 years, this great opportunity. So we've had this in March, April 2017. I mentioned this before when we talked about Venus earlier in another video. You can go back to those videos that are a few weeks old now, and this comes through a little more deeply. But also, if you go back in time to 2009, March, April, and then in April 2001, April 1993, April 1985, sorry, doing my math, April 1977, and then 69. So if you're born in those years, or 61, let's keep going, just keep subtracting 8. But I think in the 60s, she starts going into Taurus and Aries in terms of the retrograde cycle. I'd have to go back and check that. But if you're born in those years, 61, 69, 77, 85, 93, 2001, 2009, 2017, if you're born this year, you'll be listening to this somewhere in the future. You will have perhaps in this period of time, in April, March, April, perhaps May, going back a little bit, you'll have a signature of Venus retrograde, perhaps in your chart. So it's worth checking this out. Anyway, if you're having your Venus return, this is worth reflecting on, because this is part of the quality of Venus in Aries. So if you have Venus anywhere in Aries, but especially up to 11 degrees of Aries, because she's at 10 degrees, 50 minutes of Aries. So up to 11 degrees of Aries, you're really going to be feeling this. We could even add 2 degrees to that and say up to 13 degrees of Aries. Even if you look in opposition, so in opposition meaning Libra, if you have planets around that sort of, let's call it 9 degrees to 13 degrees of Libra or Cancer or Capricorn, then you're also affected by this, by square, opposition, or conjunction, depending. So this is something to reflect on overall. If you have a retrograde Venus, she doesn't operate in the same way as a direct Venus in Aries, and that's something you can mull over in terms of how you experience relationships. There may be less of this so-called dynamic way of engaging that you might read about in terms of Venus in Aries. And when Venus comes back to her normal placement in your natal chart, her natal placement, that Venus return can happen sometimes quite often. It can be twice a year. Like, for example, last year, I have a Venus in Aquarius, and that Venus in Aquarius came back both in January 2024 as well as December 2024. So it can be every 9 months in a year where there's no retrograde, but then it'll be only every 18 months in the years where there are retrogrades. So that'll be different according to your chart and your sign, and of course, the year that we're in. So consider what I'm saying here with reference to your own personal experience of that Venus, and just know that there's a different way of doing relationships that is going to be your unique way. It's Venus in Aries that might also be a little reticent, a little less direct, a little less outgoing. And that, of course, will depend on the house placement, because that would be very different, for example, for a Venus in Aries in the first house compared to a Venus in Aries, say, in the 12th or in the 8th or in the 4th, for example. We'll go through this sign by sign, and you can see how that might feel for you. What I want to point out before we go on into the sign by sign readings, I want to point out that Jupiter is squaring the sun. So the sun is is forming its square with Jupiter, which makes that even stronger. And all the more so because we've got Jupiter ruling the sun at this stage. So sun square Jupiter is something to pay attention to, especially when we're talking about Venus desires and lunar desires, which is amplifying, like I said, this feeling of what do I want and how do I want to get it? That's the Aries part. How am I going to reach out and get it? And so we have this quality of a Jupiter, which is not in strong detriment, I mean, not in strong dignity. It's in its detriment because it's in the sign opposite to what it's ruling. It normally rules Sagittarius, but it also rules Pisces. That can expand the interest in a lot of different things. And especially when Jupiter is squaring the sun, or the sun is approaching a square to Jupiter, as in this case, there is often an overindulgence or high expectations. The expectations can be extremely sort of over the top or really too high. And then we add into that the fact that Venus is there with the moon. The moon is approaching its conjunction to Venus, and Venus is backing into now the moon as well, in principle. So this is something that's telling us that we really need to reassess or be cautious around our desires and around our expectations around those desires. So that Jupiterian quality of already the rulership of Pisces, especially where we have a lot of other energy of Pisces. The North Node, for example, is conjoining, has just conjoined Mercury, and then is very close still to the Neptune. We may not be in a realistic place in terms of our desires, whether they be romantic or in the desire for wealth, or in the desire for what we describe as comfort, how we feel about things. And these are where the questions I'm going to suggest you reflect on might bring you some clarity. I just want to point out, for people who are more involved in astrology, as I am, a little bit obsessed. By the way, I am a consulting astrologer, so I do this a little bit like a calling card, so you just know that I'm here, and also to help people sort of figure things out as we go. But if you're interested in a reading with me, you can find my details below. I've been doing this professionally now for over 13 years. And I love it. I just really enjoy the one-on-one, particularly, and helping people figure out who they are and why life is shaping up as it is. And I also say that because I don't monetize my videos. And so my income comes from meeting with people. I'm now teaching as well, which has been really fantastic. And I'll definitely be repeating that exercise. And I also look at the chart in a very different way to the way many people explore astrology. And so I'll come back to that in a moment when we talk about Venus. I interrupted myself. What I was saying is, those of you who are interested in astrology, just notice here we have the North Node at 27-24 Pisces, and as I said, it's just been conjoining Mercury. It's still in a strong orb of conjunction, but Mercury is separating. The reason I'm pointing that out is because I use the true node, and the node sometimes moves direct as well as retrograde. So typically, the nodal axis moves retrograde, and a small percentage of the time, very, very small percentage of the time, it also moves direct. When you use the mean node, it averages that out. So you only ever get a retrograde nodal movement. But just to note, and this is, I think, something else that can be quite interesting and to add into this dynamic, is that the nodal axis here is direct. And it's ruled by this Jupiter. So there's this kind of a feeling of a lot of wishful thinking, which is good on the one level. We want to have a feeling of what's possible, of what's our potential. But at the same time, we have to really remember what is realistic. Now, I think the eclipses are going to help with that. Certainly the 14th of March eclipse, which will be in Virgo, will also help with that. There may be something that comes up that brightens our awareness around something that makes us realize something. Then I'll do a separate video on that. But at this particular time, it's a really good idea to observe where we evaluate and judge things based on our wishes and our desire nature rather than on the reality of the situation. And I say that specifically, not just with reference to the Venus and Moon pumping up the desire, but also because Neptune is 1 degree away from Mercury. So Mercury is still with that North Node. Everything's being amplified in terms of what we wish for. This is fantastic if you want to visualize something. You're sitting down and you're having a sense of what it is that you'd like to see manifesting in life, how you want to see yourself participating in that manifestation. This is really great. But it should also correspond to an awareness of what is going on around, and not let's say, an abstraction from that or a separation from that. So that, for example, you are not over romanticizing a relationship that actually is full of red flags. And again, I'm saying that because Venus is retrograding, and there's a lot of big expectations in this energy. And certainly, even if we look collectively, there's a lot of big expectations around relational qualities in diplomatic dynamics. And I want to keep emphasizing, we've got this Neptune here. Things are not what they appear to be. And I'm not saying that to bring everybody down. I'm saying that to say, hold your horses and continue to check, double check, triple check is what I'm hoping for, in alignment with what I'm seeing as results or at what is actually happening. And again, it's not to say you can't visualize into the future and visualize and work towards something that you want to expand or improve in your life. But we can't rely on the hopium. You'll hear me say that word a lot while we're still talking about Neptune in this year, in 2025. Right. Yeah. So the other thing that I want to point out is that Mars, that is ruling the Moon and ruling Venus and ruling Chiron, way over there in Cancer. Mars is also not in a comfortable place, but at the very least, we're getting now towards a mutual reception with the Moon and Mars. And so there's something about what we need emotionally, what we require. There may be a, let's call it neediness, or a wish for something to manifest in terms of our emotional desire or security, emotional, psychological security, as the Mars in Cancer talks about, or even the home and family-based notion of security that can have us at times overriding what is the thing that we're intuiting and feeling. So again, this impulsiveness of both the moon and Venus in Aries can have us overriding what we're feeling, because Aries is about action. Mars just wants to get shit done and go, and let's start this. Let's move along. These are cardinal energies, right? This is Cancer and Aries. We're talking about Aries, the most cardinal of cardinals, and they begin the seasons. They begin new things. They start their inceptive energies, and Mars has that inceptive quality as well. It's going now direct. It's building up to a trine with Saturn, which will be the third trine that it's had with Saturn in this cycle of Mars since September. And so there's something here that we're willing to put the work into, but let's, at the very least, let's have a feeling or a sense that I am dealing with something that is good for me or good for others for that matter. And that I'm not jumping into something that is taking me away from myself. Now, here's where that instinctive internal sense can be extremely helpful with Mars in Cancer, because there can be this emotionality. And if there's a strong emotion, especially of frustration or anger or rage, then we want to check in and say, well, what am I disrespecting in terms of myself? And there, where we can come into that sense of the red flag that I'm ignoring. For example, where's the red flag that I did not pay attention to? Or where did I override all of those outer messages and then the inner relationship to all of that to try and achieve a goal? That's that Venus and Aries kind of energy. So am I desiring something or someone, some outcome that is actually taking me away from myself? Would be the first question. And also, how are your preferences and your desires actually preventing you from living fully in this moment? So it's one thing to have a vision and have a sense of, I really would love that to happen in my life, and this is where I'm working towards. But if that becomes obsessive or a kind of a quality of at all costs, I want this thing, then we're no longer really dealing with something that we can, we will going to cause some trouble. Let's face it. When we become over emotional, we become easily manipulated. We in the over emotionality of things, we become off center. And so we're more vulnerable. We're more vulnerable to suggestion. We're vulnerable to doing things that we shouldn't be doing. We're vulnerable to doing things that take us away from who we really are, or who we overall would like to become. And this is where we want to use this Venus retrograde to really question that. Where am I preventing myself from living fully here, because I'm still waiting for or anticipating things outside of me to change, or that person riding in on their white horse, or the job, or the income, or the lottery, or whatever the thing I'm waiting for. And in the moment that I'm actually living, I'm completely numb, not feeling my life, not experiencing my life, or fantasizing. And here I come back to the North Node Mercury and Neptune that's occurring at the same time. Not to mention that Sun about to square Jupiter. So this is a question I want you to stick it on your fridge. Where am I reaching out into desire that's taking me away from myself, or taking me away from this present moment? So we want also to acknowledge the situations that we're in this moment, and really with eyes wide open, and recognizing this is where I am, and it's based on prior desire, right? All the previous desires have brought me to this moment. And so that means that we also have to, looking within in the Venus retrograde in Aries way, take ownership and recognize our role in the situation that we find ourselves in. So if a lot of our sense of what is uncomfortable, unpleasant, undesirable, not what we prefer, is if all of that is pointing outwardly, then we're not taking responsibility for our role. And I'm always in the comments, I get people saying, now you're victim blaming, and there's this whole thing about not taking responsibility is somehow about not recognizing that some people are in difficult situations. So this is about acknowledging what is happening, not agreeing with it, right? This is listen to the word, acknowledging what is happening is not the same as agreeing. Acknowledging, 3 syllables. Agreeing, 2 syllables. It's not the same thing. So let's not waste our time and stay in the victim mode and then try and defend the victim mentality. It's really now where we have to say the buck stops here. This is Aries. It's about my actions, my way of relating, my feelings, my awareness of my relational and desire nature. Venus conjunct the moon. So that's it. What is my role? Let's just look at it factually. What is my role in creating the situation I'm in? And if I don't like it, what is my role then going to be in getting myself out of this, right? And how can I take that first step? That's Aries. Take that first step to change the thing that I'm willing to change, knowing that, especially in the retrograde cycle, things that we start taking action on may not appear to resolve or move in the direction that we like until after Venus is going to station direct, which is on the 13th of April. By the way, she will station direct in Pisces. So she goes back into Pisces on the 28th of March, Universal Time. And she will, or is it the 27th? Now I'm not so sure. Anyway, 27th to the 28th of March. And she will station direct in Pisces at 24:37 of Pisces. And that's just into the 13th of April. So again, it'll be the 12th for many of you who are behind European time or universal time. And also, interestingly, on the 23rd of March, and these things I'm going to come back and talk about in future videos, so I'm not going to give it a whole lot of time, just to give you these time pointers. Venus will meet up with the sun. So currently we have the sun in square to Jupiter, or approaching a square within a day of this. And then Venus and the sun will meet at 2 degrees of Aries on the 23rd of March. And that's interesting because that's called the Venus star point. That's when they conjoin. This is part of what makes that beautiful pattern in the sky. This is the Aries star point of Venus at 2 degrees. And what we're looking at that point is also a kind of a calling in, an invocation, we could say, of the Neptune and Saturn conjunction, which will be into the 1st degree, so almost 2 degrees of Aries. And that will be later on in May, June. So it's a pretty exciting time. Venus will be in Pisces when Neptune moves into Aries. That's helpful because Venus then is exalted, but Mars is still there in Cancer, as I mentioned, so that we're going to still have to be dealing with these internal sensitivities, or this feeling of insecurity or frustration or defensiveness that can come from that Mars in Cancer and energy, right? So that's going to be again an interesting time, and that's at the end of March. So it's an interesting month, March. The more you dig into yourself, the more you'll be able to roll with the month of March and all the changes that are coming. So let's keep going with these questions because we're not done. You're not off the hook. We are collectively not off the hook yet. So let's have a look, because this is all about moving towards what we want, moving towards a better quality of life. So we're by taking responsibility, this is the paradox. It's about for 25 years I was a yoga teacher, but actually I've been a yoga practitioner since 1985, which is now a very long time. Now this is 40 years, and that one of the things that I always loved is the notion of yoga as a discipline of freedom. That means that when we recognize what's real and we really see what's going on in our behavior and what we're doing, we find more freedom. We think we find freedom in avoidance and in letting go and running away from, but that's that Neptune and Pisces version of freedom, which is like, it's not happening. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. You're 3 years old. And when we really look at what's going on and we say, oh, yeah, I chose that. That was my desired nature. That was me trying to have that nice thing, that nice shiny object, or that lovely person over there. Then you start to realize, yes, I participate in this. I always do. There's not one moment that we don't, right? Right. And so here's the other thing. We want to get away, and this I say very often. We have to get away from the sense that things are happening to us. Nothing is happening to us. We are participating in what's happening always. And that, again, don't write comments about being, victim blaming. This is not what this is about. Grow up and let's face this. We are always having life move through us, and it's our attitude to life and whatever's happening that we can modify. And we can use this Venus retrograde to recognize, what is my attitude to all of these things? How is my attitude determining my experience of all of this? So am I pushing that away? Am I rejecting what is there? Not accepting it? Remember, acceptance is not the same as agreement. It's not the same thing. And you really, if that's a difficult concept for you, sit down and really try and understand literally the definition of what it means to accept something as opposed to agree with it. Accepting what is simply opening your eyes to the situation. And sometimes people have to go through years of abuse to get to that place where they can accept what is. It still doesn't mean they agree with it. It's just step one, accept this is the situation. Step two, this is what I'm going to do about it, because that's not what I prefer. So where is that where is it in your life or in your relationships that your attitude is actually determining how you feel about or the quality of the experience itself? So it's not the thing that's happening outside. Don't point those fingers of blame outside of you. Recognize where your attitude is part of the issue that you're grappling with. And what is that thing inside of you that might be preventing you from being happy? So again, it's not about somebody else. There's a part of you that is engaging in this dynamic, and you might be sitting in the most wonderful relationship, but complaining constantly. And that is eroding the quality of your relationship, but that's only coming from your attitude to it, right? So if you change the attitude, what would be improved in the quality of your relationship? By, again, owning your own dissatisfaction, which is an internal thing. And by the way, the moon represents the mind as well. That's where we find the desires are all coming from the mind. They're all coming. Obviously, there's a desire to live. That's our innate desire to keep breathing, keep eating, keep working towards life. But of course, then we start to layer on desires. They become material, they become temporal, they become conditional. And that is where the lunar and the Venusian desires start to cause some trouble. So what is perhaps blocking our happiness? Check your thinking, check your attitude to things, check what it is that's going on. As my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, said, you already, right now, exactly as you are in this breath, while I'm saying this word, Thich Nhat Hanh always would say, you have everything you need to be happy in this moment. Now you have to find out what's blocking your happiness. It's not about the thing outside. And so it might be about a memory that you can't let go of. The moon also is about memory. It's about our remembering in a way that can also cause harm, that we're embellishing memories or we're hanging on to them too much. The pioneering energy of Aries is also about letting go of things so that we can create space to move in a new direction. This is Aries. It's like, let's go, let's do this new thing. Let's test this new thing out. And so check that every now and then, filter through your memories, filter through your belief system, filter through, and that's the Piscean energy here. We can check that Mercury North Node. How can I think about this differently? How can I see things differently? How can I interpret or reflect on these things? Because Mercury is coming right back to this place. It's going to come back and meet the North Node retrograde, and then again it's going to go direct. So 3 times we get this Mercury pass over the North Node, just like 3 times we get Venus passing over the North Node. Right. So do you need to shift your story around the memories that you're holding? Can you be in the present moment and recognize that the perpetrator or the embarrassment or the shame or the humiliation that you may have experienced is not happening now, but you're holding on to it? And now what will you do to release that and go towards this feeling of ease and a freshness in life, and especially in your relational quality? So maybe you need to shift your perspective. So you're shifting your story around. That means it's a change of paradigm. You're changing the way that you're holding the memory, you're not pretending it didn't happen. You're saying, oh, I have to think about this differently. I have to look at the situation and be in the present moment to see that it's no longer happening, that I keep recalling that. And we know that the mind is extremely unreliable. The mind is a BS artist, and it's going to pull us into things that are fantastical, that are embroidered, that are all kinds of, embellished, and not always what we remember. There's often these things that coalesce, that are memories that come together, that are things that are not exactly as we remember them. And so that fallibility of the mind and the memory is worth holding and remembering when you're thinking about a memory. Is this really how it happened, or is that my interpretation based on the feeling? Now come to the feeling and see what can I make current about this feeling? How can I live my life the way I hope to live my life based on me choosing? That's the Venus in Aries, me choosing something different. And that'll be part of the Venus retrograde cycle if you like to be in that self awareness. You don't have to be. You can absolutely live life in misery as well. That's a choice, and recognize that's what I'm choosing. And that's also very empowering. So the way that we relate to our past experience also dictates how we relate to our current ones. That's very important. What that means is that we carry a way of relating. That is a habit, becomes habitual. That's also the moon. What are our habits? It's the lunar quality, and the habit energy of what we're holding in terms of whenever something like this happens, all the emotional flooding comes back, all of the memories come back, all of the worries and angst and everything from a previous experience, even if it might be unrelated but feels similar, it'll all come back into the current one. And that's why it's important to keep checking, how are we holding memories, and how are we dealing with them? Basically, are we allowing ourselves to flow in this moment of time and flow into life, and in that Aries quality, which is about moving forward in something, also based in the Piscean quality, which is about going with the flow, but also merging with everything that's happening. That's the Piscean sense of accepting and recognizing, oh, that's what it was. That was an experience. That's something that happened in my past. And here I am today. How do I want to relate to that? So what are you feeling frustrated by or disenchanted with? What are you feeling frustrated by in terms of your relational qualities that also keeps showing up in relationship? It could be 5 different partners, but the same thing keeps happening. Or it could be 5 different jobs, but the same thing keeps happening. So there's something of a common element to all of those stories. Check it out. Might have something to do with Aries and the sense of self, the notion of self. And how can you change your attitude to these relational things so that you can freshen it up? Well, where you're engaging in a new way with what you want. So that again, it comes back to recognizing that there is something that you are participating in. If we don't recognize that dynamic and we keep throwing it back to some prior perpetrator or a situation or even a geographical position, it's, I live in this town, this is why my life is shit. Well, if you keep doing that, you can't possibly acknowledge that part of the problem is that you are still every day choosing to live in this town. And then you want to know, well, what is the desire? What is the relational constraint? What is the thing that I am still holding on to that prevents me from moving, that prevents me from going in a different direction? And where can I keep whittling that down to a recognition that I'm choosing this based on a desire? And is that desire, with that Mars and Cancer, is that desire based on comfort and or emotional neediness or financial neediness, or the feeling of security that I'm looking for? Then you have to acknowledge, okay, I'm choosing this. So therefore, I'm choosing emotional security or financial security, or I'm choosing some form of inactivity, and therefore it's a choice. And therefore, I can, at the very least, live with my choice or change my attitude to the situation because I'm recognizing now, yeah, I'm choosing this, or do the thing that would get you out of the situation. This is what this whole cycle is about. You're not supposed to figure this out by the end of this video, right? So we've got this whole cycle, and Venus won't be coming back to this point where she is now on the 2nd of March. She's not coming back to this point till the 16th of May. So we've got quite a lot of time to work through this, right? We've got 2.5 months of let's call this in. Let's try and understand this. So yeah, there we are. So how might my attitude be poisoning the thing that I actually want because I'm so stuck on the thing that I don't want? This is part of the desire nature, both of the moon and Venus. I think I've said what I wanted to say here. I gave you those dates to look back on. There you go. So that's your homework. I think I'll leave it at that. And then we're going to go sign by sign and have a look locally. And I'm only going to look at Venus. There's a lot going on. It's not sufficient to just look at Venus and say, this is what my life will be like. I'm only giving you a pointer based on this particular astrological thing because we can't be here for days. And that I need to do that in an individual reading where I look at your natal chart, right? Oh, and I meant to say that earlier. I mentioned briefly that I look at the chart differently. Your chart, of course, is a reflection of your inherited patterns. And so if you've got Venus retrograde or if you've got Venus in Aries, then just know that there is a dynamic there that was going on in your parents' relationship or in relationships in general, which has to do with women taking on a masculine role in the relationship or in the family unit for probably very practical and very good reasons, not necessarily nefarious ones, but that will affect the way that you relate. And so there's a need to acknowledge that there's a bigger story than just what you're dealing with. And so this Venus in Aries, for example, can feel like I'm taking on more than my fair share, let's say. I'm taking on more of the work in this relationship. And where can I also recognize that I'm doing that? And where can I give some of that back so that the partner can show up more fully? Or am I with the wrong partner and I'm having to do everything anyway? Or am I alone and I'm having to do everything anyway? What is the thing? And recognize where that space might be too full for the partner to come in and meet you halfway. And again, look at your parents' relationship, look at the dynamic, if this is a natal placement for you. Right, so the one other thing I wanted to show you, and here we'll pull this in where there's the station, the direct station is going to come with Saturn. And Saturn is now at this point, very close to the North Node. At this point also, so Mercury itself is stationing direct. That's a separate video. I can't do everything in one, or we're just going to go nuts. So Mercury is stationing on the 7th of April. And that station is at 25 degrees where we find Saturn and where Venus is. So there's a really strong pairing. It's an extra layer of information that we're going to get from the 15th of March when Mercury is stationing retrograde, also within a degree of where Venus stationed retrograde, and also within a degree or on the degree, in fact, of the 29th of March eclipse, which was at 9 degrees of Aries. And this dynamic is calling back much of the same story. So that Mercury retrograde cycle is supporting the Venus retrograde cycle. That's something that we did not have in those prior years. On top of that, we didn't also have Saturn, where they're both connecting to make something more realistic. That's the Saturn. That's where again, that square to Jupiter and that whole notion of Venus with the moon and everything that might be amplifying things beyond what is realistic. Now we have a sense of, okay, this is now moving in a more, let's say we've understood more, and now we know we can go forward with faith and with this hope and with this vision, but it's grounded in something a little bit more solid. Now we also have Neptune. Remember, Neptune is ruled by this Mars that just seems endlessly tied to Cancer. And Mars is in a really strong trine with the North Node, very strongly building to a trine with Mercury, and has just trined Saturn. as well. It's still in an orb of trine actually with Venus, so it's really trining all of what's in Pisces at this moment and coming up to trine Neptune, which it will do once it gets into Leo once again. So, and that's going to be on the 18th of April. So what is that? Not even a week later, 5 days later. So Chiron is also in a conjunction with the sun on this day that Venus stations direct. So again, we're looking at something around healing. Now, the sun is exalted when it's in Aries, and that also brings about an awareness of self, an awareness of what we aspire to in our conscious awareness of what we want or how we might engage out in life. That's symbolic. And if you are an Aries and if this is happening around your birthday, then strap in, because this will be quite the year for you. This is going to mark the whole of the year coming up. If you're, let's say if you're born 12, 13, 14 of April. So really quite a dynamic solar return for those people. All of this is coming together to ask for an awareness around self and healing around things that we think that we're responsible for, but we really aren't, or where we're not taking responsibility and where we need to. So try and step all of it up, and we'll see how all of that can transpire in the course of, let's say, 2.5 or even 3 months, while Venus is only going to clear Aries actually and enter into her sign of Taurus on the 6th of May. So it's a very long story. It's a very big part of the feeling, the quality of what we're experiencing in 2025. Let's take responsibility for what the hell is going on in our lives instead of waiting for daddy to come and fix it. Right, so where was I? We're going to go now sign by sign. No, we don't want to move 1 year at a time. We're going to go sign by sign, and we're going to jump into, guess who? Aries. Aries, whoop, there we are. So of course, this is very, very centered on your experience of self. If you are Aries, Sun, Moon, or Ascending sign, this is really important because it's going to be impacting your self, literally yourself. What do I want? What do I prefer? How do I relate to people? This is part of the axis of relating. The first and seventh house is the relational axis. What do I want to accomplish or know about all of these things? And Mars is in your fourth house of home and what makes you feel secure. So this is really literal for you. So do listen to everything I was talking about. It applies directly to Aries. And then just having a sense of how you might want to go forward based on when Venus goes back in your 12th house, how you can recognize where there are some unconscious patterns or even deceptive patterns around relationship or qualities of relationship that are not in your awareness that might be affecting you and how you show up in relationship overall. And especially always when I speak about relationship, we're also most especially starting with the relationship to ourselves. This is the Venus and Aries quality. So the relationship to ourselves is actually dictating how we relate to everyone else without exception. This will apply to all signs. All right, so Aries, this is your moment, meaning 2.5 months or longer. So basically, March, April, May. This is your moment. So reflecting on all the things that matter to you, your values, and what's important overall. So Venus rules your second house of money and values. It might have something to do with income, but most especially focus on your self-worth, your value, and how that manifests. And then, of course, Venus rules your relational house because that is Virgo, not Virgo, that is Libra across the way from you. And that's something that really will impact your relational quality or who you relate to whom you relate. So yeah, good luck with that, Aries. Definitely, if you haven't already, listen to the introduction because it's really all about you. Taurus, Venus is your ruler, and when she retrogrades, it's extremely important to pay attention. So you've got 3 months-ish of Venus now in your 12th house, and then going back into your 11th house. And the notion of your ruler being retrograde really impacts yourself because there's a lot that you are relating to now in the 12th house internally or in a sense of unconscious awareness that's ideally coming to your awareness, and how you might navigate relationships that affects you directly. Venus is with the moon, which is also your exaltation ruler for Taurus. And so there's a lot that you need to consider in terms of how you relate to yourself, how you feel about relationships, how you feel about issues that may or may not have come to your awareness in relationship. Listen again to the introduction, because what I was talking about there really helps with the fixed sign energy of Taurus, where there can be a certain holding on to emotional patterns or holding on to patterns in a way that actually harms you overall. Even if the harm is relatively minor, it's causing dissatisfaction in your life. And so you want to really get clear, what are those unconscious patterns and how do they manage your day-to-day? How do they affect your day-to-day, let's say? Venus goes back into your 11th house as well when she's moving back into, on the 27th, 28th of March, she's moving back into Pisces. And she'll stay there until the end of April. And so there's a long story here until the end of April. For many of you, that's going to be around your birthday time before Venus is coming back into this place in your 12th house. So part of your quest, let's say, or your desire nature, or what you recognize your desires are taking you towards, is also with reference to your friends and social groups, or the social causes, or the beliefs that you might have around your political or religious causes. That's partly part of the Venus retrograde story for you. And that you can already look at now, because Venus was in your 11th house since January. And then also that Venus dynamic is in the 11th house, is about, what do you want in your future? What is my desire for the future? And here you got a lot of energy, Taurus. It can be also with reference to actual financial gains. So Venus is the exaltation ruler of your 11th house of gains. But let's think in terms, at the very least, of how you interact with groups and friends, and who supports you. And in what way any kind of grudge, any kind of frustration or resentment is undermining that. So Mars, which rules your 7th house of relationship, is also in your 3rd house of communication. And that, of course, Mars is ruling this Venus, and where the moon is as well, with Chiron in your 12th. Really reflect on the way that you might, connect with people, how you speak with people, how you perhaps blame or hold a grudge, or can't let go of a feeling, or can't let go of a way of thinking about something that is ultimately harming you. And then go back over those years that I mentioned in the introduction and see if there was a pattern that you can identify that might relate to that. It's kind of have something to do with extended family relationships, cousins, uncles, siblings, all those extended relationships as well. And to what extent your preferences, your desires, your way of relating to people is working within those groups as well. And where are you not taking accountability for how you participate in all of that? And again, this is not about blaming, shaming, naming, all those things. It's about taking responsibility. And that's a very healthy thing to do if you want to get where you want to go. So do listen to that introduction. I think that could be very helpful for Taurus, especially as Venus is your ruler. All right, Taurus, make the most of this, and I'll see you in the next video. Gemini, Venus is retrograding in your 11th house of friends. And your ruler, Mercury, is with the North Node and Neptune. And so and the 11th house also represents your future, your vision for the future, your dreams and hopes for the future. Maybe there's something here about your preferences, or about how you're engaging in friendships, or how you're engaging in social relationships, or how you're engaging in terms of your desires for the future that requires some adjustment. Maybe the adjustment is about how you are speaking with integrity or not, or the adjustment might be around where you're a bit iffy around people in your life, and you're kind of hanging out more because they're still there, and rather than really actively choosing your relationships. And where can that improve for you? Your ruler Jupiter is in your 1st house right now. And that can have a feeling of great expansiveness. There's a great opportunity to reach out into life when Jupiter goes through the first house, but it can also scatter you. And it's ruling your 12th as well. Jupiter is ruling, sorry, your 10th house of work and career, and how you step out the front door when you leave the comfort of your own home, and how you participate out in the world. And that's where you've had a lot of activity for so many years already. Saturn has been up there for 2.5 years, and we've got Neptune, or 2 years, let's say. Saturn has been there, 2 years from March, and Neptune has been there since it first entered in the end of March 2011, beginning of April 2011, something like that. There's a lot going on in your 10th house, and now there's a lot of opportunity to clarify that as you go forward into this now forward movement of Jupiter, your ruler, and then Mercury itself, not your ruler, your 7th house ruler and your 10th house ruler, and Mercury itself, which is your ruler, is going into forward momentum to arrive at the point where Venus is currently only to retrograde on the 15th of March. And then go backwards just pretty much where Venus is going to end up as well. And that will, both of those planets land on Saturn, and they land very close to the North Node. So the way that you choose now, choosing your friends, choosing your vision for the future, choosing your sense of what you can receive. This is another thing for Gemini with Mars on the 11th. Maybe there are some of you that it's hard for you to receive. With Mars ruling the 11th, there can be a lot of action and doing. And by filling in that space, you're taking the space away from people who might like to come and offer something. So notice that it could be in the way that you talk or the way that you engage. Is there too much talk about yourself? Do you bring too much of yourself into friendships or into the way that you participate out in groups? And can you allow others to have some of that space as well? Is there any, could you maybe be less, what's the word? How do I say this nicely? I'm going to say it because it's not going to apply to all of you, but it's worth keeping in mind. Where do you use relationships? So that's that Mars on the 11th. Where do you use friends for other ends, as a means to an end, for example? So notice that, because it's an interesting thing to understand about yourself. Where can I be in the dynamic of relationship without it having to be utilitarian? And Mars in the 2nd house is ruling that 11th house. It rules your 6th house of work as well. So what's going on here with the Venus, who's the exaltation ruler of your 10th, as well as Jupiter, who's in your 1st, ruling your 10th and ruling your 7th of relationship, there's a lot of need to understand how this relationship dynamic, or who you relate to, perhaps it's you that's being the one that is being used for somebody else's purposes and ends, and therefore do you need to step up more? I don't know, maybe that's part of the story. All of this is the interplay of the next 3 months, and it will affect your day-to-day, it will affect your work, it will affect the income story as well. Right, Gemini, there's a lot there. So I would have to see your natal chart to know more specifically how all that's going. And certainly the eclipses will be telling you a lot more about this whole story as well. That'll show you something quite powerful. Cancer, Mars is in your sign, and it's ruling this 10th house Venus retrograde in the house of your social status, your career, how you reach out into the world, how people see you. This can change your reputation, or it can make you engage in new relationships. So this social status, meaning, am I married? Am I not married? Am I divorced? Am I single? Am I a parent? Am I not a parent? That's part of that whole dynamic of social status. But it also is acknowledgement and reputation. And so here the Venus can show what is the reputation of this individual. And that will affect your house of gains, because Venus rules your house of gains. And of course, Venus also is the exaltation ruler of the 9th house, where we find so much activity. The moon, that is your ruler, of course, rules your 1st house and is ruling that Mars that's there. So there's luckily a little bit of reciprocity at this time between the moon and Mars in your 1st house. So there's a lot of this awareness now of what I want, what my desire natures are. You know, how is that pulling me into relationship or pulling me into this dynamic of wanting a better status, or how do I reach into professional dynamics? Do I want to be in a professional or personal or an intimate relationship with this person who is in my relationship sector right now? And this will certainly affect your home, because for Cancer, Venus is the ruler also of the home, but it's also your inner home. It's your psychological home and what makes you feel secure overall, which is that fourth house, which resonates with the energy of Cancer. But Venus is ruling your fourth, and she rules your 11th as well, of friends and your hopes for the future and so on. So there's something here at this time that can also change potentially the quality of home, or actually literally where you live, especially as Mars in the first is ruling the 10th and in a square to that home and family place, and that meaning property and physical home, like the house and home that I live in, or the feeling of home. What is the quality of home? Mars is the exaltation ruler of your 7th, also your house of relationship. And Saturn rules that house of relationship from the 9th, which is ruled by Jupiter in the 12th. So again, there can be also some really nice dynamics here around relationship. Could be coming from a place that's much more spiritual, or coming from a place that feels more meaningful. This can be, again, dynamics of business partners as well as intimate partners. And all of it is part of the bigger story of the next 3 months, because Venus will be backing into that 9th house once again, where she's going to meet up with Saturn. And that's where she stations, where Saturn is going to be at the 25th degree of Pisces. Venus will station at that point in conjunction with Saturn. So that's going to impact your relational house. It's going to impact your 8th house of shared intimacy, shared resources, the occult. Like if we're talking more basically here for Cancer, also we've got a lot of activity going on behind the eyes, as it were, and your curiosity around that can bring in new awareness or new people who will help you go in that direction. Because remember, Venus is ruling your 11th house of the vision for the future, also the people that you want to do that with, whatever the thing is. But most especially, go back over, however old you are, go back in time, 8 years at a time, March, April of 2017, March, April 2009, etc., and go back and see what was happening then and how did that impact my life. And don't think only March, but think, how did that change the dynamic of my life for many years to come? At the very least for the Venus cycle, until Venus came back to Aries at that time. So that would be in the space of 9 months afterwards. Right, I think that's it, Cancer. So good luck with that. Lots going on for Cancer, for all the water signs at this time, all the cardinal signs especially. Leo, this is happening in your 9th house. It's in a trine to you, which is marvelous. When the planets are trining you, there's a lot of support. This feels very positive. It feels very out there. And this can also bring you a lot of information in terms of your overall desires. So not just your personal desires, but also your desire or the sense of your purpose. Like, what do I want to do with my life? Where do I get the juiciness in my life? And this is especially supported because Jupiter is in your 11th house at this point. And that really brings a lot of support from people around you. And that Jupiter is ruled by the Mercury on the North Node, which is with Neptune. Beware of being deceived. Beware of being deceived in intimate relationships or in financial shenanigans or anything that you might engage in with people. Certainly do not loan friends money at this time, with Jupiter in not good dignity in the 11th house, ruling this Mercury North Node Neptune conjunction in your 8th. You wouldn't see that money again. And even Saturn wouldn't help in this case. Your ruler is there along with all of that, and your ruler is squaring that Jupiter. So you might feel out of the goodness of your heart that you want to support somebody, or somebody might be supporting you, and that's fantastic. So keep moving in that direction, but also keep your eyes open because you may not be seeing clearly what's actually going on in terms of the motivations. The 8th house is also part of our hidden motivations, whether it's yours or the motivations of others that you're relating to. So try and also reflect on that. As I mentioned in the introduction, please listen to the introduction, that Venus is all about those desires, the moon as well. It's the heart's desire. What do I really crave in my lifetime? And that's very, very much rhyming with the ninth house energy. Mars, which is ruling that ninth house, is in the 12th, which has to do also with another way of looking at hidden desires. It's unconscious. It's the unconscious motivations that we might feel. And Mars rules your fourth house of psychology, house and home, your childhood and how that might have impacted you, your lineage. This can also be connecting you to family stories of family issues that require your attention at this time, that might be patterns of behavior. Again, listen to the introduction, that might be undermining your well-being or your overall happiness. Jupiter rules your fifth house of self-expression, which is why you're so Leo. You see, it's not just like Leo is a Leo because it's Leo. It's Leo is known to be dramatic and really out there because Jupiter rules the fifth house, and that Jupiterian quality currently is out there in your vision for the future, and it's being squared by the sun. So there's maybe a larger than life, even for Leo, a larger than life feeling of what do I want? How do I grab that brass ring and get out there in the world? And so this Venus is showing you what is necessary to reflect on before you grab the brass ring and go. Because that ninth house quality where Venus is, it's wonderful. It's about adventure and relating to people, perhaps also foreigners, because Mars is in the house of foreign lands, people from far away, and it's ruling the ninth, which is also about foreigners, foreign lands, connecting with people with purpose. And just go through that initial introduction to see how it all is impacting you overall. But it does look really favorable if you keep your eyes open. Leo, reach for that brass ring. Don't let me stop you, but just do it in a way that where you recognize your own potential for self-sabotage or not finding those red flags. All right. So good luck with that, Leo. I'll see you in the next video. And Virgo, this Venus retrograde is in your eighth house, and the eighth house is about your desire nature, but what you are not necessarily open about expressing. So it can be hidden desires. There can be something to do with interpersonal relationships, those intimate relationships, or what you share with others, what you receive from others, that is either not living up to its potential, or that you're wondering, is this working? Is this good for me? You do have a long period of time to test the waters, as it were, and to really see where that may not be in alignment with what you want. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily the wrong relationship, but I can promise you that after this whole spring, let's say the early months of the year, for those of you in the Southern Hemisphere, that let's say the first 5 to 6 months of 2025 are going to show you if you're with the right person. That you will have no doubt, but really listen and trust your judgment, trust your assessment of that. Now we've got this opportunity, Chiron, the moon, and Venus in your eighth house, really showing you some aspect of what you aren't necessarily aware of, and how that might need to be reassessed over the Venus retrograde cycle. Your ruler, Mercury, will follow this retrograde pattern of Venus. I will do that in a separate video because this year is quite extraordinary. I don't normally bother with the Mercury retrograde cycle because it happens so often. It's not really such a big drama, but it's this year worth paying attention to. And it's following the same pattern as Venus is following. It's going to come right back over Neptune, over the North Node, and meet with Saturn. And Venus and Mercury both retrograde at roughly the same degree, within a couple of degrees maximum of the, within less than 2 degrees of the 29th of March eclipse. And you have the 14th of March eclipse in your sign, where the South Node is also ruled by your by Mercury, which will then be in the 8th house. So there's a lot to contemplate here. That also can be patterns of shame, taboo stuff, stuff that you're embarrassed about, or that you may have experienced before that has been traumatizing to you. And this is part of where you can heal from that, recognize that pattern, take your part of it and leave the rest to the others. Take what's yours, leave the rest, and recognize how this is influencing your the way that you engage out in the world. So we see that also because Saturn, pardon me, good God, I'm a little tired today. Mars, that's Mars, is in your 11th house of your vision for the future and how you engage socially, how you engage out in the world. And there's a dynamic there that you can understand that might be based in something that you're becoming aware of based on prior feelings of guilt or shame. This is quite common for Virgo rising to have feelings of guilt and shame. And that is again part of the dissatisfaction or the self-judging quality that can be there with Virgo, where you're putting your expectations on this almost impossible standard of perfection, or an impossible standard of being good, and recognizing that where that is self-defeating, and it's certainly going to continue to beat you up in so many ways by absorbing that kind of sense. You want to put your faith and standard in the spirit realm and see the perfection I'm looking for is already there. I am, as a spirit being, I am perfect. And this egoic personality that I operate with is the steam on the mirror, or it's the mud that's tarnishing the nice, otherwise unblemished outfit. So that reflecting on that 8th house stuff is really important. How do I feel in intimate relationships? Is there an experience of relational quality, including potentially sexual quality, that may have been damaging to my self-image or damaging to my relationships? And how can I free myself up from that? How can I explore that and work to a place where I actually can be liberated and quite joyful in my intimate experience? So no small potatoes there for Virgo. I will come back and we'll talk a lot about Virgo when we look at the 14th of March eclipse. So make the most of this in the meantime, Virgo, and I'll see you then. Right, and now we have Libra, where your ruler Venus is in the 7th house of relationship, and she's kind of wondering, am I in the right relationship? Am I doing this well? Do I get what I need out of relationship? Is this the right person that I'm relating to? Am I wasting my time here? And again, this can refer back to your career stuff or any partnership that is professional or business partner. And Venus, of course, is also in this rulership not only of you and yourself, but also of your 8th house of intimacy. So what you're discovering here in terms of this notion of relationality, if that's a word, your relationship with other people, is also going to show up in your day-to-day that can operate from a place of like the workplace, 6th house, workplace, or your habits or health. And that can include mental health because Venus rules your 8th house. So here's something. Is my relationship affecting my mental health? I would say if that's the case, this is an opportunity to step way back, step back, or is it affecting my physical health? Step even further back and really reflect on that and notice where you're putting yourself in that position and where you can also take yourself out of it. Right? It's about choices and preference and how we're guided by all of that. And again, this has nothing to do with victim shaming or blaming. It is about recognizing where we are participating in life and not having it doled out to us. If you take your ruler and you put your ruler in the 7th house, it's like saying, here, this is me in my 7th house. This is how I'm doing relationships. So this is the opportunity really for 3 months to experience that. How is that dynamic working for me? How does that show up in my, in this case, outer experience, where we have the ruler, Mars ruling Venus there, where we're looking at this potential for that to affect your social status or your career, how people see you, how you engage out in the world. All of this is coming through this reflection of Venus. We've already done part of the reflecting as Mars has been going through your 10th house since September. So in September, October, and then since January until now, from January till now, Mars was retrograding in your 10th. And that will already tell you quite a lot about how you're stepping out into the world as well. So lots going on here with reference to also the victim martyr dynamic, which is where the nodal axis is in that Pisces and Virgo axis, which can also, again, be part of where you feel obligated to doing things. Where do I feel obligated to people? Do I feel obligated to a job? Do I feel obligated to a social status? Do I feel obligated to, you name it? And questioning that, because Venus is going to come back into the 6th house. So your ruler coming back in the 6th house, you're going to stand in your 6th house place and say, where am I overdoing things? Where am I overgiving? Where am I over expecting? That's another one, especially as Jupiter from the 9th is being squared by the sun. So there's a vision of what you think you're here for that requires your new thinking. Am I here for this person? Am I here for this quality of relationship? Am I chasing the wrong person? Am I chasing the wrong idea of relationship? Am I chasing the wrong business partner? Yeah, so all of that is there on the menu for Libra. And good luck with that, Libra. I'll see you in the next video. So Scorpio, Venus is in your 6th house, and that is the other house that Mars, your ruler, is also ruling. And Mars is in your 9th house of your vision for what you're here for. What is my life all about? What do I believe in? What is important to me? What's my sort of spiritual motivation in life? And Venus in the 6th house is literally, how do I do that every day? How do I show up every day? Ruled by your ruler. So she's quite dynamic, and there's a drive now, maybe a willingness or a wish to be in a different place in your everyday life. Who does the dishes is part of this story, where the Venus is questioning her day-to-day behavior, day-to-day habits. The moon is also there. We saw that in the introduction. It's actually with Venus at this time. Of course, now it's separated because I'm moving through the chart, but this dynamic is extremely helpful, and you can really reassess, reevaluate your day-to-day work, or even like the housework and the schedule that you keep. Your health is implicated in this as well. The things that you do, how do they affect my health? And then Venus rules your house of relationship. Venus is the exaltation ruler of your 5th house of romance, and she rules your 7th house of the other, the partner. She also rules the 12th house of your unconscious. That also represents foreigners, foreign lands, people from far away, your spiritual relationships, your spiritual quality as well. And this is all factored into this date. How does that all affect me day to day? What is going on in my relationship dynamic? We see also that you've had quite a lot of change since about May 2018. You've had a lot of change in your 7th house of relationships and the way that you connect with others or partnerships of all kinds. And so Venus is showing you here how much of that panned out. Because the last time Venus retrograded here, Uranus was there in Aries in your 6th house. So there's something that you can remember back to 2017, for example. Yeah, at that stage, Uranus was still in your 6th house, ruled by your ruler, Mars. And now you can reflect back on this. What is this cycle going to bring you that you've learned over these last 8 years or so? Yeah, so it's an interesting time. Something to do with romance. Venus moves back into your 5th house of romance, of your self-expression, of love, where everything is piling up for you right now in a trine to your sign. And that will also harmonize a lot of what feels perhaps edgy right now with Venus in your 6th house, because it's not really easy. The connection between the 1st and the 6th house is what we call a quincunx or an inconjunct. There's no visibility. You're not it's not an easy fit, not easy to relate to that. So this can also be something that requires a little input from the unconscious. And Jupiter in the 8th house of what is taboo or what is secretive, or what you receive from other people, what you can gain through marriage, what you can gain through partnership. it's also adding to this now that it's moving direct, the understanding that you would have gleaned since October, well, Jupiter rather was retrograde. Mercury is ruling that Jupiter from your fifth house. So we're still looking at this dynamic of how do I express my love? How do I express joy? How do I express myself? Is this about children? This can also be about children for those of you who have children, or the whole issue around do I or don't I have children? How might that affect your life? If you are expecting children at this point, that child is going to be incredibly impactful for you in your life. In a mostly beneficial way, I have to say, because Mars, your ruler, is trining from the ninth, and all that energy from the fifth is really supportive. So that can be a really beautiful thing for Scorpio. I think I've said what needs to be said. Do listen to the introduction, Scorpio, so you can get more about this. But this is it's a big question about how your day-to-day choices and preferences are going to affect relationships for the longer term. Right. Good luck with that. See you in the next video. Sagittarius, Venus is in your fifth house. So that's nice because she's in a trine to you. That really supports you. And this whole questioning is around how you grapple with maybe the issue of love, or what you prefer, how you want to express all of that, how you want to reach out into that. And then Venus is going back into your fourth house of what makes you feel secure. That might also reference where do I live? And the fourth is also ruled by Jupiter, just like your ruler Jupiter is ruling the first house. It also rules the fourth, and Jupiter is currently in your house of relationship. So there might be a dynamic that has to do with a love relationship, either one that's coming back because it's Venus retrograding, and often that can bring either you're reflecting on old relationships, or they are literally coming back. And then also, what do I prefer, or what do I want? How do I want to be happy? How do I manifest my happiness? How do I do something that makes me happy? That can also be a creative impulse. It can be where you create art, or where you create, through expression, through dance, through singing, through something that you're expressing of yourself, even creating through a business, creating through something that you're doing as an entrepreneur. If that has to do with this, then that's also something that will affect your money story or the gains, because Venus is ruling your 11th house as well. If this is about relationship, or how you're wanting to express yourself through a hobby or through something that you love to do, then that expression will find its stage in the 11th house. You're going to express that out in the 11th house. And the Venus ruling the sixth house is showing how that impacts your day to day. How does that impact the way that you show up every day, or the things that you do, the habits and things that you do every day to support your everyday? So this finding what makes you happy, finding, like Joseph Campbell that says, find your bliss. It's not about finding your bliss. It's not about being happy for the rest of your life, forever, ever and ever. Amen. That is, it's about finding the thing that you love so much that you will tolerate pain to do it, like getting out of bed at 5, or I have to work harder. I have to stay at work over the weekend to get this thing done. That's following your bliss. Where the thing lights you up so much, it jazzes you up so much that you'll just carry on doing it and make that effort. So don't confuse following your bliss with having to be happy doing all the stuff. If you are working for yourself, as I am, you still have bookkeeping to do. And if you enjoy that as much as me, then you'll know how that is not so nice. So I just have to stop this for a moment. All right, Sagittarius, I'm sorry about that. Between hungry dogs and delivery men, I had to leave you there for a moment. But I think I've said what I needed to say. This is really an opportunity to find your joy and act on it. And that will take you into May, when Venus goes into your sixth house of your everyday, and it can impact the work that you do and even the gains that you get from your work. So it's no small thing. Go back in time, listen to the introduction, and hear what I had to say about those years in previous Venus retrograde cycles and how they might impact you now. So good luck with everything, Sag, and I'll see you in the next video. Capricorn, Venus is in your house of home. And there has been quite a lot of activity around the notion of home for Capricorn. And this is something that you want to extrapolate into a feeling of home and groundedness, I'm feeling grounded where I am in terms of your internal home, your psychological or emotional home, but also in terms of your physical home. So this can also be literally what's going on at home, especially with reference to your children or the love of your life, for example. Fifth house is ruled by Venus. And also, how do I feel around my home? Do I like it? Venus is also the exaltation ruler of your third house. And that's your neighborhood, it's your local space. And she'll go back there as well and retrograde into that third house. And there may be a quality now of recognizing, I don't like where I live. I want to go somewhere else. I don't like my neighborhood, don't like my neighbors, or for whatever reason, I need to move, but it's going to bring you something qualitatively better. And when you understand why you're making the choices that you're choosing, that's the preference aspect of the Venus. Listen to the introduction if you haven't already, to hear more about that. So for you, Venus also is the ruler of your 10th house of your social status and your career. And Mars rules your 4th house of your home and family, as well as your 11th house of your vision for the future and the house of gains and your social connections, from the 7th house where it is currently in Cancer. And Mars has already gone through that retrograde cycle, so it's taught you a lot about relating and how you want to relate to all these different dynamics I'm naming now. But it's going to also affect this feeling of this Venus retrograde, because Mars is not in a really comfortable place. And so there can be a lot of tension around relationship, a lot of tension around home, a lot of tension around the dynamic of professional contracts or engaging with partnerships of all kinds, or your ambition. The 10th house is your ambition. It's your overall goals and aims. And that Venus, that quality of Venus is really stirring up a lot of personal desire. Is this still what I want? Really look into those past years, as I mentioned in the introduction, and try and understand how your choices, your preferences are still impacting your 10th house and how you show up. That might even include your marriage, for example. So Venus representing the 5th house is also with reference to children, anything that might have to do with what children require or how you're needing to renegotiate your relationship with your children, how they are impacting your mood or how you're experiencing life. And what needs to change around that dynamic as well. The 4th house is, what do I need to feel happy? In the case of Capricorn, I need a lot of independence. It's Aries on the 4th house. I need a lot of freedom. I need a lot of me time. That's the Capricorn. That's what makes Capricorn a little bit uh, grumpy sometimes. Grumpy, that's the Mars ruling the 4th house, and that curmudgeon type quality, or that misanthropic kind of quality, is literally that Mars is ruling both the 4th house as well as the 11th house of how you socialize. And so now on top of that, you've got that Mars in the 7th house of relationships. So maybe you need more space. Maybe you literally need people to just back off, or how do I recreate a little bit more me time or space for myself? Well, this cycle of Venus going back and forth between your 3rd and your 4th will show you what you need and how you communicate that, how you connect with people locally, how that all piles together. And then also when it comes through that in May, Venus going back into your 5th, or rather it's in June, sorry, Venus going into your 5th house, you're going to be able to express it. So what makes me happy? Well, now I'm here, let me show you. This is the thing. And you've gone through that whole process. So finding more joy in the process, certainly by June, that will help a lot, especially because then Jupiter will be in your 7th house in opposition to you, bringing a lot more expansive, joyful, nourishing quality to your relationships, which since September have been tense, to say the least, with Mars retrograding there in the 7th. All right, Capricorn, good luck with all that, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Aquarius, Venus is in your third house of your local space and your communication and everything that connects you to your extended family or your siblings, your cousins, etc., and the people you kind of hang out with, or the coffee pals or whatever. And there's a lot of notion of choice and choosing, and the sort of willfulness, or the need for that, need for willpower, need for courage, which comes through the third house. So this desire nature of both Venus and the moon that are together at the time of that retrograde station, there's a lot to contemplate. How do I use my desire nature? How do I use my willpower? How do I choose what I choose? And how do I communicate that with people? Is there something that disconnects me from people in the way that I'm communicating something? Is this about work? Because Mars is currently in your sixth house of work, not just currently, but since last September, going in your sixth house of work and putting a lot of emphasis on your day to day, and it's ruling that third house. And that third house is individualistic. It's Aries. This is also what makes the sense of Aquarius is also the Mars on the third. It's like, I'm blunt. I say what I think. I express myself in ways that are quite sort of categorical. And I'm individualistic. I've got Mars on the third. I choose for myself. Thanks very much. And so that is also part of this desire nature with Venus. What do I need to choose? How do I need to reflect on that choice? And that will impact not only your fourth house of what makes you feel more secure, what makes you feel more at ease emotionally or even materially, also maybe even with reference to home. Third house Venus, do I like where I live? Do I like the space surrounding me? Are the people around me good? Do I need to change neighborhoods or change towns? Do I need to move in some way? And your ruler Saturn is in the second house. It's the exaltation ruler of Saturn at the moment is Venus. And so there's something that's interesting there in that dynamic. Saturn rules your first house as well as your 12th. Venus rules your ninth house. And the meaning that the second house reference, where Venus also carries a resonance, is in the sense of your values. I forgot to mention that part. It's in my mind and didn't come out through the mouth. So that what are my values? That's another part of this Venus retrograde for you. All these choices that I have to make, all these connections that I have to make, all the things I need to communicate about based on the ninth house, my sense of my purpose and my vision and my faith and what I believe in. How do I connect that to my values? Well, this whole Venus retrograde cycle is going to show you all of that, and it's going to change your everyday. It's definitely part of the dynamic of Mars there. Go back to 2017, where you'll find a really strong, impactful story around that. And I especially go back to 2009 to have a similar kind of sense of this period of time, especially because Mars was in the sixth and Venus was in the third back in early 2009. So that will be more clarifying perhaps for you. If there's a decision that needs to be made, reflect on how that shaped up for you in 2009, keeping in mind that none of the Piscean activity was happening apart from the sun, which would have been there. So this is all new. This is all new territory anyway. I'm just basically trying to tell you what I think might happen, but God only knows. So there we are. So yeah, make the most of this, Aquarius, and do what you can to muddle your way through the choices that will need to be made based on your internal values, based on what is really in your moral compass, and not just based on money. So that will keep that will sustain the everyday longer. It might have something to do with money. Specifically, Jupiter is ruling your 11th and it rules your second. And Mercury from the second is ruling that Jupiter. So if it is something to do with money, obviously still come inside, come to yourself and try and understand how to make this choice based on your values, not only your impulsive desires. All right, listen to the introduction to be sure. Okay, good luck with that, and I'll see you in the next video. Pisces, Venus is in your second house of money, earned income, what you hold on to, the possessions that you carry, what you have, what you own, what makes you, what do you think holds value for you? And this is important because Venus is actually your exaltation ruler. And so she's part of a dynamic that you relate to really well, the Venusian quality. But in the second house here, it's ruled by Mars. This is also one of the reasons that Pisces couldn't really care less about money. I say this as a Pisces stellium. Not very good with money, not super interested. And that's partly because Mars rules the second. And it's just like, whatever, let's just get this over with. There can be exceptions, but just to say, this is part of the dynamic here is to get over the whatever and try and figure out what do I actually need to do to assess or reassess my income, my values, my way of managing money, how that's working for me or not. And also Mars, which is ruling that second house, is in the fifth house of also another energy of pleasure and desire nature, but coming from this feeling of how do I express my happiness and how do I express myself through life. And the moon, which rules that fifth house, which is currently ruled by Mars, is also in the second house. So coming through values is very important. So I'm talking about your internal values as much as what you might need financially to thrive or what stuff you might need. Another way of looking at this, especially as you've got Pluto in your 12th now, is to reflect on what you can let go of in terms of stuff. And that will be reflected back on what you really hold on to, what you really want to hold on to, ideas and people and things that you really want to carry with you, what values, but also what stuff. And this could be a great time to downsize. This is anyway the case because Saturn is in your first house of self, and it's asking you to kind of remodel, to shape yourself up for the next cycle of Saturn, which will be another 29 years before it comes back to this place. So there's a big part of this dynamic which says, you know, there's a lot that you can let go of. There's a lot that you can release to create space for things to come in. And that you'll find the stuff that comes in when Venus goes back into your first house and stations direct at that point on the Saturn. So the Saturn that's been trying to show that lesson, when Venus stations direct on the 13th of April, it will be at that 25-ish degree point with Saturn. Mercury is holding much of the same pattern, and Mercury is currently ruling Jupiter from your fourth, and they're in an interesting reception. It's called a mutual generosity. It's between Jupiter that's in your fourth house of what do I need to feel secure, what makes me happy overall, and then the Jupiter, the Mercury that is ruling the Jupiter at this point from the first house is really reflecting on the vision, the dreams, but we have to be grounded. And Saturn for Pisces is helpful in this sense because Saturn is, it won't allow things to get too far off the ground, especially for Pisces, but that's still a risk. So keep well aware of red flags or things that are not being taken care of in a way that is helpful. So Venus rules the 8th house of other people's money, what you share, relational qualities, intimacy. The second house also represents family and everything that supports you. So something really dynamic and important that is reflected on in terms of that Venus retrograde. Go back over the introduction to hear more about that. So there's something here that you can learn about what you need now that you're not receiving. How do you, this is the Venus in Aries question, how can I learn how to receive rather than doing it all myself, reaching out into life and doing all of this by myself? Which ultimately is not satisfactory. So this is especially true if you are Pisces with a Venus in Aries. So I think that covers it, Pisces. There may have been something that I've forgotten, but nonetheless, we'll get there because we're going to have to talk about this again and again. And I do wish you all the best. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.